from the Post-Millennial. Seattle home with pro-Trump, pro-police signs targeted in drive-by shooting. According to the Seattle Police Department, the homeowner's vehicle was also damaged by gunfire and had been vandalized with pride flag stickers. That's crazy. So, I mean, that's the story. 3 a.m., several bullet holes in the home's front window. So, look, I have this conversation with people so often about the potential of civil war, and it's like they've only ever seen movies, and they think that there has to be armed factions making declarations. There has to be clear borders between factions, which has literally never been the case, not even in the American Civil War. So what is actually happening before our eyes, Antifa, leftist, these aligned groups who have named cells across the country, they have organizations, they go by names, they recruit, they flyer, they use guns. They are becoming increasingly more violent, targeting people for political reasons. More so than we've seen in the past several years, this is becoming entrenched in our political infrastructure. Whereas the far left was a weird fringe component 10 years ago, they're now a structural component of the Democratic Party.
Yep.
This is the escalation happening before our eyes, but people still expect there needs to be a rebel leader with 10,000 strong army coming out in California and saying, we are going to fortify, which is not going to happen. What's going to happen is there's going to be a drive-by shooting. There's going to be a catalyst that ignites a conflict. Someone's going to come out and be like, my dad was shot by a far leftist and he's going to return fire. And then you're going to hear reports of a skirmish breaking out. Then you're going to hear a week later, another skirmish broke out. And you're going to get pockets of violence because this is what we actually see in histories and conflict. Then you will get leftists going, we have no choice but to increase our ranks and band together because they're attacking us. And the right's going to respond exactly the same.
I mean, the argument against, a civil war, people talk about, it's going to be like, there's no North and South, et cetera. If there were to be civil conflict in the U.S., and we talked about it a bit, it's going to end up being like your cousin ends up dead in a landfill somewhere. It's going to be way closer to what's going on in Mexico than it'll be to, the Civil War in the 1860s.
Look how little it took. If you combine the pandemic, obviously that was a major factor. But the fact of the matter is, during 2020, we had people putting black boxes on their Instagram thinking that they were going to make a change. And it started with that. And then it ended up with Kenosha and the shooting of Michael Reinhold in Portland.
You mean the shooting of Aaron Danielson?
Michael Reinhold. Yeah, Michael Reinhold shooting Aaron Danielson in Portland, all within like a week of each other. I remember after Kenosha, I was thinking to myself that we were at that point where basically each side was galvanized to the point where people were willing to go to the street and shoot because I had seen it,
But the left is and the right is not. So when Biden won, what did the right do? You got J6, and that was a limited riot. It was weak. You were there.
It was the pepper spray wasn't weak. But
yeah, but I mean,
the overwhelming majority of people were, they did wander in. I mean, I saw people on the outside of the house doors trying to break the doors down. There were 20 of them. Then I saw about 700 people.
It was a proper riot.
It was a riot.
It was a proper riot.
The best the right mustered up was an impromptu riot at the Capitol, which we've
seen. Just the voice of the unheard.
But we see nothing before or after. No strong, prominent right-wing riots in the streets, Molotovs, nothing.
Well,
like
after
that.
How hard the DOJ punished them, I feel
it's like not. No, that's that. But you're missing the point. How hard the DOJ punishes Antifa doesn't matter.
Well, they barely do, especially compared
Michael Reinhold was shot and killed. That hasn't stopped them. So even when there are instances where the DOJ goes and literally kills the guy, the left is psychotic. The right is not. And so it's order and chaos. Most people on the right are like, look, I just want to go to work. I want to take care of my family. I want to live. I want to exist. The left is cognitively impaired. They have an ideology that makes no sense, and they'll destroy whatever they have to get it. So even when they do face some consequences, it doesn't phase the larger movement. They will still be radicalized and still engage in this insane violence. And I think largely it's because they face no counter.
Yeah, look what happened to the Proud Boys after. I mean, even before January 6th.
But you look at the New York incident is the perfect example. When the Proud Boys got into a fight with Antifa, what did Antifa do? They fled. What did the Proud Boys do? Gave their name and information to the police and said, thank you, officer. And then they all went to prison.
Yep.
That's what the right does.
Yep.
So the left knows. They're organized. I mean, those leftists we just talked about who ambushed the cops, they had Faraday bags. So their phones couldn't be tracked. So they could keep their phones with them and use them when they wanted to, but then they wouldn't be tracked. They knew what they were doing. The right has no idea what they're doing. They show up to protest and go, here's my information, officer. What do you mean I'm being arrested? They went to J6 and didn't wear masks. Antifa, that's what they do. That's what they're famous for, is wearing black masks. And then you get all these right-wingers being like, storm the gates and don't wear a mask and let the cameras film you.
I was wearing a gas mask. I was better prepared than the cops. It's a whole nother question in and of itself.
Indeed. I think that what we've gotten over the past decade plus since Black Lives Matter is that young college kids, this was always the intent, as I've explained it from the far left. They intentionally get the cops to beat college students so they can radicalize them. They intentionally create scenarios where college kids will get arrested so they can radicalize them. The generic scenario is when they're doing these direct action meetings, they will actually say, here's where we'll get the mass of normies, and then here's where you guys will go in and agitate the cops to get the normies arrested. Then once they all get arrested together, and these 20-year-old women are in prison, are in the jail cell being held, crying and scared, they say, don't worry, I'm here for you. Let's sing songs together. They all sing in the jail cell. Some, not always, but it's a common tactic. And then what they'll do is they'll say, why did you get arrested? And they'll go, I wasn't doing anything. I was just walking down the street. And they'll go, that's a violation of your rights. These cops are evil. And they'll start whispering these things in their ears. So the cops play right into it, but it's the system being weaponized by these individuals for the purpose of recruiting. Now, what happens 10 years later? These radicalized leftists, who were once just college kids, go to more protests, get angrier and angrier. They now have a defined enemy. That schism was set the moment they got arrested the first time or watched a friend get arrested or something like this. You then take no action against them. Trump administration won't send in the National Guard, won't send in federal law enforcement. It lets them firebomb buildings. They now feel there are no consequences. They don't think. They feel. If they thought, they would calculate the response from the Trump administration and the feds. They don't. How do they feel? They're not actively planning when they're out firebombing and throwing mortars at a building. They're just feeling invincible. In their mind, the actions they take has no consequences. So what's the next step? They start shooting up houses. They start shooting up ICE facilities. They shoot cops in the neck because, once again, they still feel like there are no consequences, or at the very, very least, they will be minimal.
Do you think L.A. was a different case? What's happened in L.A. recently?
So the response, the response to Donald Trump sending in the Marines, was leftists ambushing ICE officers and CBP agents, one guy hiding in the woods with a gun and shooting a cop in the neck. When Trump says, enough, we will stop your riots, and sends the National Guard and the Marines, they say, we now have reason to escalate to the next level.
So what's the solution? This sounds like a death spiral.
I think the solution is overwhelming force to crush the left. That's it.
Yeah. I mean, that's part of what Donald Trump was elected for, right? Like we wanted to see Donald Trump produce a situation where we have law and order. People talk about it all the time. You know, he didn't act assertively in 2020 because he was concerned with the way that he was going to be treated and the way that people were going to respond to him, because Donald Trump at his core, he wants to be liked, but he saw that there was no chance of them being in any even charitable towards him. So now Donald Trump's back, and hopefully he's going to put the hammer down.
The more that we go through all of this stuff, the more that we experience, the more that we learn. It seems like a lot of what we were explained to about classical liberal society was just, overt libertarianism and liberalism was a tool used by individuals who wanted to do things that were degenerate, amoral, or outside of the Overton window, and arguing that you should be a good person and allow them to do it. Whereas the founding of this nation was much more moralistic, and everything was enforced to a much crazier degree. People would be criminally charged and imprisoned on much less evidence than we have today. People couldn't speak freely. Swearing in public was considered obscenity, and blaspheming was illegal. But we've increasingly liberalized to the point where you have in Philadelphia, we have this story we'll pull up in a minute, where it's just the 4th of July and they've got full auto switches on their switches on their 9mm on their handguns. They're spraying each other. Chicago has become like this. We don't actively seek to solve the problems anymore under this classical liberal, I guess, facade that we've tricked ourselves into believing that never existed. So let's try this.
Thought gun control solved those problems.
Sure didn't. The founding fathers said no cruel and unusual punishment. Which one is that? Is that the 8th Amendment?
Yeah.
One of them. And what does that really mean? Well, back then, they certainly still had cruel and unusual punishment by today's standards. We have just completely We've created a brittle legal system that fails to actively solve the problem of psychotic individuals who do psychotic things. And so I've said this, based on, if I was going to do a simple math equation, how do you stop violence like this? I think it would be defined by today's standards, cruel and unusual, despite the fact not actually being anywhere near torture. The example I've given about Chicago gang violence, I can end Chicago gang violence overnight. I guarantee it. You know how you do it?
Arrest all the gang members?
No, that won't do it because they operate in jails. And they stab and shoot each other in jails, and they recruit out from into the jail to people outside of the jail. You don't make the punishment jail. You make the punishment, they have to wear a baby bonnet and a diaper and crawl down Roosevelt Avenue while saying, I'm a goo-goo gay boo-boo. And then everyone gets to come out and laugh at them as they crawl for a mile while being forced to say goo-boo boo-boo, goo-boo boo-boo, and everyone films it. And it's funny, right? But it's true. The motivation for the shootings in Chicago over gangs is about reputation. Take their reputation from them or threaten to destroy it forever, and they will not violate the law. They don't fear going to jail because jail is a base of operation for their gangs. So we've said it's cruel and unusual to make them wear a baby bonnet and harm their reputation. It's like, okay, I don't actually think it's cruel, but it is unusual. And that is an argument against it. How then do we actively solve the problems when the gangs operate illegally in the jails and no one stops them? Prison guards help them smuggle things in. Someone does. People are smuggling in drugs and cell phones all the time into these jails. The entire system is not functioning properly. So we keep telling ourselves we have to adhere to these standards that never existed.
Well, not to mention the fact that if you look at a place like D.C. and you look at the carjacking statistics, you know, all these armed carjackings that are taking place are perpetrated by minors because the minors are used by the gangs as their foot soldiers because they know that they won't get strict sentencing. So because of that vacuum that was created by that loophole, they're like, okay, cool, we'll use the minors to take advantage of that.
So if you were operating like mathematically to solve this problem while trying to maintain compassion, what would the solution be to minors carjacking cars as a loophole for gangs?
Put them in jail instead of
put them in jail and treat them as adults.
Yeah.
And say we don't tolerate gang activity, and we say if you are coordinating with adults, you'll be charged as one.
Yeah, if you stick a gun in the face of a citizen, then you're going to be charged as an adult.
Well, the argument I'm making is, if a kid commits a crime, the argument is they don't know what they're doing, so they're tried as a child, but they're still punished. But if the child coordinates with an adult, the argument is you are engaged in a conspiracy with adults, so you'll be charged as an adult. Otherwise, you have this loophole.
Yeah, and I mean, crime is down, but the carjackings have been soaring over the last 4 years, so they're still way above what they were pre-pandemic level.
It is fairly simple to say just arrest them and lock them up and throw away the key. Remove the crime from the streets. We got to pay for that. My point ultimately comes down to there are benefits to the expansive liberalization of society. We have more gun rights than we've ever had, despite the fact people think we don't. We actually do. I mean, the NFA is bad, but it was actually much more difficult to own a gun previously, and gun rights have expanded tremendously, especially with constitutional carry in more than half the country. You go back to the founding of this nation, when they had the Second Amendment, it was ratified. Local jurisdictions would still take your guns from you and say, nope, you can't have them. And then if you said, I got a constitutional right, they'd be like, oh, go tell the Constitution and let me know. And there was nothing you could do about it. It was famously well known. If you were walking into town, sheriff would stop you and say, give me your guns. And you could say no. And they'd be like, then get out. And you'd be like, but I got a Constitution. Yeah, go tell the Constitution. Let me see what he says. Today, there's actual rigidity to the law and the rules about guns, even though we argue over it. But it expands beyond just things we like into things we don't like, into people getting let go and these weird jail reforms that release criminals. So we're sitting here saying we have to continually be a weak nation and allow evil people to do evil. But at a certain critical mass, it's simply not working. Our cities are in decay. I think if the founding fathers came back and saw Philadelphia today, they would be like, okay, we got to change those laws. What is causing all of this? And it's like, well, you've got moral degradation, social discohesion, and weak politicians that are out for themselves. Good luck. I don't know what you do about that.
I mean, I don't know what you do, but like, aside from what, we talked about a lot is trying to change the culture, trying to change the way that people interact with each other and the way that they view, the United States. Like the idea that the U.S. is inherently evil is a underlying cause of a lot of this stuff. If people thought the U.S. was a good place and worth defending and worth preserving, they wouldn't be like, oh, let's just let immigrants in for the or illegal immigrants in here to just take over or come in here and live here and use our services and essentially take things away from the native population.
So Dylan, a member, asks, what do you do when they refuse to crawl like a baby? Send them to jail? No, you make them crawl like a baby. It is called grabbing them by the arms, pushing them to the ground, forcefully putting a bonnet on their head, and then standing next to them and say, crawl. Now, the funny thing I think about that story is I don't know that I say I don't know that I literally want that to happen. But the truth is it does solve an overwhelming majority of the gangland style violence that happens in the city. There also is turf war, which is difficult to deal with because that's like someone's going to say, I don't care about the consequences. You are stealing my resources. So the consequences are nothing compared to the loss of my home and what I'm supposed to be controlling. And these are the gangs controlling a business enterprise or something. However, it does seem unusual and weird to make someone put on a baby bonnet and a diaper and crawl down Roosevelt Avenue. But it certainly would solve the problem. These people would be terrified to get caught. They're not scared. The people that I've hung out with on the South Side when I was a teenager, they would say things like, I haven't gone to jail yet, but. That was the common parlance. It was always yet. Jail was a foregone conclusion that you will do. And there are kids that are used by the gangs to murder people. The gangs go to a kid and say, you live here, you have to join the gang, here's a gun, you got to go kill this guy. And then they do it. And then they get released at 18. They'd be 14, 15, they go to juvie for a few years and come out at 18, and then that's it. And that's how it operates. That kind of violence has a solution, and it is don't let kids be used as loopholes for murders. And then the honor violence, the you've disrespected me violence is solved by threatening their honor, what they truly fear. But we've created a system where they don't fear any of our penalties or punishments. It's a part of their game.
Well, it's glorified in their culture too.
Yeah. They talk about how hard they are for having served.
So Rick Ross, wasn't that kind of the CIA kind of giving him a little push there with the crack in LA?
Well, I mean,
isn't this kind of what the power? Yeah, isn't it? So isn't this? My point being that maybe there just isn't a desire to solve the problem, and pointing the finger at Democrats is easier than actually going in and trying to solve it.
I think the culture is more angled to free my whoever for whatever crimes he did, and really F the law is what I think many people in these criminal communities, like the perspective they take. And even if, if you're a talented artist, I feel like there are many famous rappers who, despite their criminal actions, people don't care about them committing crimes. I think it's the singer-songwriter Tory Lanez allegedly shot Megan Thee Stallion, and despite all these allegations against him, a lot of the rap community is still behind him. And now the catchline is free Tory because he's a popular, handsome, and rich rapper. And I do think there's something inherently wrong with the fact that we believe some people should be able to get away with certain things, and I think that's especially pronounced in certain communities. So despite O.J. Simpson being overwhelmingly, the evidence overwhelmingly showing that he was guilty, black people in our country, that evidence,
not guilty in a court of law.
But despite all the evidence being crystal clear, and many people still admitting to him being guilty or thinking he was guilty, thought that he should get off. So I don't think it's about the evidence when it comes to a lot of his supporters. I think they wanted to get him off regardless, and I think a lot of people think that of a lot of famous people. Despite them committing the crime, they don't think they should have to answer it. And it does feel like there's a two-tier justice system because, look, if you're a famous rapper, if you're Kodak Black, Donald Trump may pardon you. I think he was allegedly a gun charge. Is that what it was? And I think Serge, do you know any other rappers? I feel like I'm missing a few that Trump ended up pardoning or what have you. And it's just the crime does pay in our country. Well, you could commit crimes. You commit white collar crimes.
A lot of times gun charges, depending on what the gun charges are bunk in my opinion.
But that's not the point, right?
My parking ticket crimes don't pay. That's for sure.
I just got a fire hydrant ticket for within 6 feet in New York City. Those pieces of work.
Thanks for checking out this clip from Timcast IRL. Make sure to watch the show live Monday through Friday at 8 p.m. Subscribe to this channel, and we will see you all there.